Midnight, I woke up in an unfamiliar place. Someone knocked on my car window and told me there was a celebration to attend tonight. I got out of the car, blurry-eyed, and saw the village decorated with lanterns. "Is it a wedding?" I asked the villager. The villager didn't respond, but somehow, I recalled that I was there to be part of the wedding party. I turned around to glance at the large truck I drove, which was empty now, but I distinctly remembered it was loaded with stuff when I arrived. I couldn't quite recall, and when I turned back, the villager was gone. The damp evening breeze helped clear my head a bit. The village seemed to have just experienced a heavy rain. Looking around, I saw that the small village was quite dilapidated. Most houses nearby had locked doors, with dark and empty courtyards, but lanterns hung on either side of the gates. As I drew closer, they were lotus lanterns. Then, a commotion arose from a distance, and I followed the noise. I saw a villager's house with the gate open, the yard lit up, and people bustling about as if setting up for a banquet. Just as I was about to go in and inquire, I ran into an elderly woman coming out. I stopped her and asked, "Is this a wedding?" The elderly woman looked up at me, and I was startled. Her face was strange, with all the features but not quite human-like, more like a wild cat. "Not a wedding," she croaked. "It's sending the daughter back." Sending the daughter back? Shouldn't that be for a new bride? It seemed even more bizarre to hold such an event in the dead of night. As I stepped inside the yard, a middle-aged man hurried over and grabbed me. "Oh, you've finally come. Now that the rain has stopped, we need your help to send the girl home." I was stunned. "Me? I'm the one sending her." I was dragged to a table and sat down, surrounded by villagers who were all very enthusiastic. They immediately poured me a drink and offered me food, but I didn't dare eat because all the villagers, both men and women, young and old, looked like they had cat faces. Just then, a gong sounded from nowhere. I looked up and saw 4 pallid palanquin bearers carrying a large red sedan chair in front of the gate. The middle-aged man standing behind me suddenly let out a blood-curdling cry unlike any human sound. Then, everyone in the yard rushed to the gate, seemingly trying to block the sedan chair from entering. Despite my mind still being foggy, my instincts warned me that everything here was not right. I glanced around, looking for an exit to leave quickly, but there was only one door leading out of the yard, and behind me was the farmhouse. The house was quite well lit, with figures faintly visible in the windows. I heard a familiar voice calling, "Dragon Brother? Dragon Brother." Someone was calling me. My name is Lucas Blackwood, and my memories began to return. I approached the house, and the door was slightly ajar. The person calling me seemed to be inside. I pushed the door open, and a gust of cold wind swept through, dimming the brightly lit room. Seated inside were 2 figures, with a long table between them bearing 2 red candles and 2 photos side by side. Was this a happy occasion or a funeral? Under the candlelight, I saw that the 2 seated figures were not living but a pair of papier-mâché middle-aged husband and wife. Looking at the photos on the table, the young man's picture was very clear. My memories rushed back. 2 days ago, a father-son duo approached me, Harold Young and his son Ethan Young. Harold told me urgently that his son had lost his soul after going out to play, turning into a daze. Seeking guidance from a master, he learned that his son's soul was taken by a mountain ghost. At that time, I was just an old driver, but I wasn't afraid of the supernatural due to my birth chart and tough look. To pay off my debts quickly, I took on any job. Harold's reward was generous, 30,000 yuan up front, with twice that amount if successful, but the preparations for a fake wedding puzzled me. There were no boy or girl papier-mâché figures, just a pair of middle-aged papier-mâché husband and wife with large red flowers pinned on them, plus a papier-mâché red sedan chair. Harold explained that these were to satisfy the ghost and retrieve his son's soul. I looked back at Ethan, who was silent, head bowed, as if he hadn't slept. Harold rushed me to leave. I started the car and joked to lighten the mood. "Since we're getting married, why did we only prepare dowry and not betrothal gifts?" Harold looked puzzled for a moment before pulling a faint smile. "Isn't there a lot of paper money and ingots? What betrothal gift is more practical than money?" As memories returned, I gazed at the pair of papier-mâché husband and wife seated at the table inside the house, exactly those Harold had asked me to bring. The arrangement here seemed to be for the ghost's wedding, complete with Ethan's photo. I wondered about the guests outside and why they said it was the night to send the daughter back. Behind me, the door slammed shut, the surroundings fell silent immediately, and the once brightly lit yard plunged into darkness. I struggled to adjust my eyes to the dark, managing to find some faint light. The two red candles resembled ghostly eyes in the night, casting shadows on the dusty long table and spider webs, clearly showing that this farmhouse had been abandoned for a long time. Just as I wanted to return to the yard, I caught a glimpse of someone standing in the inner room to my right. She wore a bright red wedding dress, illuminated by moonlight streaming through the window like blood. I reached around my waist and gripped the spirit whip made of 11 segments of peach wood, a gift from an old Taoist priest I saved as a child. He told me, "You have the appearance of a Jura but the heart of a bodhisattva. You are destined to deal with the spirits." I slowly drew out the whip and turned to face the woman. Her face was pale, her features hidden by her loose hair, and she seemed young. We stood silently facing each other as cold wind blew through the door gap. She suddenly raised her chin and opened her mouth, spewing out dirt. My heart tightened as I prepared to strike, just when a sharp cry echoed from outside. The main door of the house was slammed open, and the red sedan chair appeared at the entrance. I turned to look back at the woman, only to find the room empty. I didn't relax because the sedan chair still blocked the door. I approached it step by step, suspecting that the ghost had entered the chair. Initially, I thought this was the papier-mâché sedan chair I had transported, as even the four pallbearers looked identical. However, upon closer inspection, this chair was different. The body was painted with various wedding rituals. There were scenes of the bride entering the sedan chair, matchmakers supporting the door, and a welcoming procession with music and instruments. But every pallbearer in these scenes had ghostly faces. I suddenly lifted my head to see that the four pallbearers' faces had transformed into wicked ghostly visages. I drew out my spirit whip and swung it through the air. The whip curled up the curtain, and several pale ghost hands quickly retreated into the chair. The ghost wasn't inside. The pallbearers lifted the sedan chair and stepped back in unison, disappearing from sight in a flash. Was this a ghostly sedan chair? I vaguely remembered an old legend from South Ridge about the daughter's sedan chair. There was a peculiar rock that resembled a sedan chair, and people said it was a ghostly vehicle. It's said that when people marry, they avoid passing by South Ridge because the ghostly sedan chair might capture the bride, and she would never be seen again. Confused, I walked out of the house into a yard that was now desolate. Weeds grew nearly half a person tall everywhere, with no sign of the previous lively banquet. I also couldn't find Harold or Ethan. The village was clearly long abandoned, with an eerie silence. Suddenly, a nimble black shadow darted out from beside my feet. It dropped something in front of me before disappearing into the underbrush. I looked down and saw a pair of sneakers. The shoes were new, though they were covered in mud and hadn't been abandoned for long. I picked up the shoes and examined them. They didn't seem to fit a boy. But where could these women's shoes come from in this abandoned village in the middle of nowhere? "Dragon, brother?" Harold's voice startled me, and I instinctively hid the shoe behind my back. Sure enough, it was Harold, who looked frantic as he waved at me from outside the yard gate. "Dragon, brother, come out. Something's not right here. It seems the mountain cats are up to something." In our area, mountain cats refer to a type of wild lynx, particularly common near South Ridge. Among the older folks, these lynxes are said to have spiritual power, akin to Huang Daxian, a figure from traditional Chinese mythology. Some can even cultivate spiritual powers and confuse people, leading them into caves to devour them. I casually threw the shoe into the nearby bushes and walked out of the courtyard. "Where have you been? What's going on?" I asked Harold. Harold sighed, still looking anxious. "I don't know either. It was just getting dark, and I saw you were still half asleep, so I decided to unload and burn the papier-mâché by myself. But then, a group of people appeared out of nowhere, saying they wanted me to join a banquet, and they dragged me away. When I realized something was off, I ran out and found that all the papier-mâché was gone. Those mountain cats were following me like they were possessed, and I drove around the village a few times to shake them off. "Where's your son?" I looked around but only saw Harold. There was no sign of Ethan. Harold's gaze darted left and right. "The situation isn't good. The wedding is being disrupted by those things. I think we should head into the mountains. The expert told me this trip wouldn't go smoothly. If the wedding can't be completed, we'll find a spot with good feng shui and bury the talisman he gave me to suppress the ghost, then figure out how to recall my son's soul." After finishing, Harold apologized again. "It's just that I'll need to trouble you one more time, Lucas. Don't worry, once it's done, I'll add another 20,000 yuan to the payment. I won't let you go through all this for nothing." I nodded. "Since we're already here, I'll help until the end." I followed Harold into the mountains. He mentioned finding a spot with good feng shui but didn't explain how, just kept looking at his phone like he was using GPS. The sense of unease in my heart grew as I began to recall the series of events from our journey. Harold and his son had set off with me around 10 a.m., reaching the area near South Ridge by 3 p.m. The sky still had light rain then. South Ridge is a series of connected mountains, with a long stretch of road leading to the village. Perhaps it was the proximity to South Ridge, but Ethan suddenly became frightened, trembling all over and murmuring non-stop. Harold immediately shouted at him, "Be still. If you hadn't run everywhere, this wouldn't have happened. Keep muttering, and I'll deal with you when we get back." I could only try to calm Harold down by offering him my thermos to make tea for Ethan. Harold thanked me repeatedly, complaining, "I've spoiled this kid too much, letting him do whatever he wants. Why did he have to come to South Ridge for fun? How old is Ethan? Is he in college?" I asked casually. "No, he's in high school, just a sophomore. I thought he'd have a relaxing summer break. His classmates wanted to go hiking, and I didn't intervene much. Why did they end up staying overnight in that abandoned village? There are plenty of inns in the nearby town," I asked. Harold explained, "Well, it was raining so hard, and they didn't catch a ride. They were all about seeking thrills, so they ran off to that village." Harold gave Ethan some tea, which seemed to calm him down a bit. The sky outside grew darker, and South Ridge's massive mountain shadow fell across the road, making everything even darker. As soon as I turned on the car lights, Ethan let out a high-pitched scream from the back seat. "She's coming! She's coming!" Harold turned around to scold him. "Shut up!" I looked out the window on Ethan's side but saw nothing. However, a black shadow swiftly crossed the road in front of me. Ethan seemed terrified, continuing to scream despite Harold's attempts to silence him. I glanced through the rearview mirror and saw Ethan clinging to his head, his shoulders shaking as Harold pulled him around. Then, a white, ghostly hand appeared on Ethan's shoulder out of nowhere. The hand was clamped tightly on him, and it seemed to have materialized inside my car. Angered, I told Harold to move Ethan to the front, and I whipped out my spirit whip. I swung it above Ethan's head, and it cracked loudly in midair. Ethan stopped screaming, and the ghostly hand vanished. Harold relaxed when he saw Ethan seeming okay, but Ethan suddenly kicked his legs wildly and started grabbing his neck. He muttered. Through the rearview mirror, I saw the hand reappear. It was now two hands, tightly gripping Ethan's neck as if trying to choke him. Swinging my spirit whip again, I heard two more cracks in the air, and the hands disappeared. Ethan breathed heavily, collapsing onto the back seat. Fearing Ethan would have another episode, Harold moved to the back seat and hugged his son tight, muttering curses. I stayed alert, gripping the steering wheel while keeping an eye on the road behind and ahead. That's when I saw a fleeting figure on the roadside. A high school girl in her uniform with a ponytail intently staring at our car. Ethan, still shaken, muttered, "Don't find me, don't find me," outside his window. Fog began to rise, making the road almost invisible, so I slowed down. Harold grew impatient, grabbing the back of my seat. "Lucas, don't drive so slow. It has to be tonight. My son can't wait any longer." I understood Harold's concern for his son but had to advise him, "It's too foggy. Don't rush. Once we pass this mountain stretch, it might clear up." I kept the spirit whip out, firmly gripping the wheel. Ethan suddenly started screaming again, pointing at the window in terror. "She's out there! She's out there!" I glanced at the window on Ethan's side and saw a pale handprint slap against the glass. Harold cursed again, but I couldn't get too distracted because I realized the mountain shadows on either side of the road seemed to be closing in. South Ridge is mountainous, and the highway cuts through the mountains, typically casting intimidating shadows even on sunny days, let alone on a rainy, foggy day. I tried to stay calm but couldn't shake the feeling that the mountains really were moving closer. It seemed like the mountains were devouring the guardrails on either side of the road. This couldn't be real. It must be some illusion, I told myself repeatedly. Just as Harold shouted, "This isn't right. Why is it so dark outside? Lucas, it feels like the mountains are about to come down." The mountains on either side indeed began to press down, their peaks looming over us. "Shut up, all of you," I yelled, pressing the window button to lower it and preparing to swing my spirit whip. However, before I could react, joyful wedding music filled the air from ahead in the fog. A mix of drums and cymbals accompanied by dancing shadows. I saw what looked like car headlights piercing through the fog, and several silhouettes moving along. They were all dressed in red, beating drums and blowing horns as they approached. Behind them was a wedding procession, led by a black sedan decorated with red cloth on the hood. It looked wider than a typical sedan, but I couldn't make out the brand. The group seemed to have people flanking the cars, but the fog was too dense to see their faces clearly. I cursed silently, thinking it would be better to encounter a ghost car than this eerie wedding procession at such a moment. I steeled myself and continued driving forward. As the procession came into view, the fog began to clear, and the mountains seemed to recede from us. Harold and Ethan quieted down, fixedly watching the procession outside the window. The joyful noise gradually became discordant and then ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. The people who were dancing became stone-like, their limbs stiff. There was no driver visible in the wedding car. Only a pair of pale, icy hands could be seen. As we passed the procession, I glimpsed the faces of those moving along with the wedding car. Each wore a malevolent ghost mask. It was peculiar that after passing them, we encountered no more dangers. The fog lifted, and everything outside seemed normal, with the car interior also settling down. We were close to the village by then. Harold was holding Ethan in the back seat, whispering softly to him. "We're almost there. It'll be fine soon." We arrived at the abandoned village, the sky not yet fully dark. Harold said we had to wait until after 9 p.m. to start burning the papier-mâché and placing the substitutes, so I rested for a while. He poured me some tea from my thermos. "Thank you, Lucas. We wouldn't have made it without you." I took the tea and chatted with Harold for a bit before drinking it. Afterward, I surprisingly fell asleep. "Lucas, are we driving in circles? My map isn't moving," Harold asked, turning to me as I snapped back to attention. I walked up to see him fiddling with a black phone screen. I tapped on the screen and it lit up. Harold looked taken aback, stuttering, I must have been misled." I didn't respond, and Harold continued leading me forward. "Can your phone's mapping find a place with good feng shui too?" I asked. Harold chuckled dryly. "That master had been around here before and gave me some coordinates. It's over there somewhere." "Was Ethan alone outside the village?" "Don't you worry about him. I'm not at ease, but what can we do? Coming here is risky too. Thank goodness you were here, Lucas. That master told me we wouldn't have succeeded without someone with tough fate." Just then, rustling sounds came from the woods on either side, and we followed the noise to see a pair of glowing green eyes. The owner of the eyes was on all fours initially, but upon noticing us watching it, it stood upright on two legs like a person. "Damn those mountain cats!" Harold didn't hesitate, picking up a stone and throwing it. The shadow retreated but didn't flee. Instead, more pairs of green eyes lit up around us. "What do you want? I haven't provoked you." Harold cursed at the shadows in the woods, then pulled out a portable torch from his backpack. I didn't expect him to be so well prepared. The torch lit up brightly, and the mountain cats around us seemed genuinely afraid, retreating into the darkness one by one. Harold held the torch and staggered forward, carrying his backpack. I followed behind him, marveling, "You're quite resourceful. I only have this one son." Harold's voice was strained. This time, we didn't take long to reach our destination. It was a treeless slope, but I immediately recognized the stone in the middle. It was shaped like a sedan chair, with a rectangular body and 4 protruding stone pillars. "Ghost sedan!" I exclaimed. Harold glanced back at me with a slightly frozen expression but quickly said, "Yes, the master must have intended to use the power of the ghost sedan to suppress the female ghost and retrieve my son's soul. But I heard ghost sedans only capture brides." Harold patted his backpack with a hint of satisfaction. "I burned the wedding dress for her. She's already a bride." At that moment, thunder rumbled in the sky, and a flash of lightning cut across the area. I saw Harold pull out an iron box from his backpack and gesture for me to help. "Lucas, let's dig a hole and bury this quickly." Suddenly, all the scattered clues connected in my mind. The iron box Harold brought was one I had seen before, though different in size. I had helped people dig up similar boxes in the past. They contained the birth dates or hair and blood of victims. Those who buried these boxes did so for nefarious purposes. I took the shovel Harold handed me and walked beside him. "What about Ethan's classmates? Weren't they here for a group hike?" Harold continued digging. "I didn't ask, but I heard some of them got sick with a fever." "Sigh, just kids." "Yeah, just kids," I replied coldly. "Were they all boys?" "No girls." Harold's movements paused, and after a while he said, "No, I don't think so. Is that right?" I lightly tapped the ground with the shovel. "You didn't see the high school girl standing by the road when we were driving? She wore the same school uniform as Ethan." At this moment, I had my back to Harold. In the silence that followed, a strong gust hit my back. I was prepared, quickly turning around to block with the shovel. Harold finally revealed his true self, holding the iron shovel with a ferocious expression and red eyes. "You're going to die since you know," I sneered. "I didn't know you hadn't told me which high school Ethan attends. How would I know what his uniform looks like?" I just tricked him into exposing himself. Harold realized his mistake and let out a furious roar, swinging the shovel at my head. I gripped the handle and kicked him hard in the stomach. Harold, though not small, was no match for my height and strength. I knocked him to the ground, and he couldn't get up for a while. I remembered the muddy shoe and the ghost in the farmhouse who spat out dirt whenever she opened her mouth. Enraged, I demanded, "What did you do to that girl? Was it you or your son?" "Not my son. My son didn't do anything," Harold shouted wildly, but I recalled Ethan's behavior in the car, his cowardly and guilty demeanor. Clearly, it was him. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but just as I turned around, a mountain cat let out a sharp cry from behind me. Before I could react, a stick struck the back of my head. It was Ethan. My brain buzzed. Harold took the opportunity to get up from the ground and grab me from behind, shouting at Ethan to act. Ethan pulled out a sharp knife from his waistband. Seeing double, my head ringing, I tried to break free from Harold but couldn't muster the strength. A lightning bolt flashed across the sky, and Ethan charged towards me with the knife. In a split second, a black shadow darted between us and bit down on Ethan's wrist. He screamed, flailing and dropping the knife. The shadow fell to the side, bristling its fur and snarling at Ethan. It was a young lynx. I gritted my teeth and slammed my head backward. At that point, my head was already chaotic, so what was one more blow? Harold was knocked sideways and released his grip. I turned around and gave him a fierce kick that sent him crashing into the ghost sedan. Ethan tried to pick up the knife, but I rushed over and pinned him to the ground, pressing my knee into his face. "Tell me, what happened to that girl? Where is she?" Young brothers, Harold cried, seeing his son pinned down, begging me. "I'll give you money, however much you want. Please, it wasn't my son's fault. He was implicated. Don't waste your breath. Where is that girl?" I pressed my knee harder, causing Ethan to cry out. "Dead. We didn't mean it. Was it Penelope Jenkins who wanted to cause trouble, and Derek Chan and his friends just wanted to play with those mountain cats?" But Penelope insisted on calling the police. They got into a scuffle, and I wanted to intervene, but Penelope kept saying she'd call the police. Derek got angry, and we didn't mean for her to die when she hit that rock. "You!" I punched the ground near Ethan's head, making him scream. "You didn't do it? What were you doing here?" Harold cried out. "It's true. Don't blame my son." Young brothers, that girl had my son's student ID on her. If the police find it, they'll pin everything on my son. Now I fully understood what was happening. Whether Ethan was telling the truth or not, he and his dad were here to retrieve the student ID. The girl's restless spirit and the help of the mountain cats made it impossible for them to get close. Harold had sought a master, who devised a plan using the ghost sedan to suppress Penelope's spirit. To ensure success, Harold even drugged my water, causing me to fall asleep after parking. But things didn't go as planned when the wedding was disrupted by mountain cats. He had to use the backup method, asking me to accompany him into the mountains and burying the iron box to suppress Penelope. The iron box likely contained Penelope's birth data or similar items. I tied Ethan's hands and forced him to stand up. While calling 911, I made him lead me to where Penelope was buried. The site wasn't far from the village. After all, they were students and hadn't dared to venture deeper after the murder. Ethan was terrified along the way as the woods produced rustling sounds. I practically dragged him, and by the time we were close, he was so scared he wet his pants. I tossed Ethan aside and looked at the shallow grave where Penelope was buried. The heavy rains had washed away much of the dirt, exposing her feet. Only one shoe remained. I couldn't bear to imagine Penelope's parents' reaction upon seeing this scene. I have a daughter too. If anyone dared to harm her, I'd make them pay. A chilling sensation seeped from the nearby woods, and I heard the mountain cats howling again. Alarmed, I swiftly pulled out my spirit whip. I saw four pale-faced pallbearers carrying a sedan chair emerging from the woods. Ghost sedan. I guess the wedding car I encountered on the highway must have been this entity in disguise. At that moment, even the mountain cats seemed to fear it, and I couldn't let them approach Penelope. As the ghost sedan charged towards us, I confronted it, whipping the pallbearers mercilessly. However, they didn't flinch. It was like striking stone. The evening wind lifted the sedan curtains, revealing several ghostly hands swaying inside the sedan. Since the pallbearers were unresponsive, I decided to act from within. I charged into the ghost sedan, and chilling air enveloped me from all sides. Countless ghostly hands protruded from the back of the sedan, binding me tightly. I tried to swing my spirit whip, but my arms were immobile. Just then, a ghostly hand with a pale grayish hue covered my mouth and nose, filling my nostrils with an awful stench. I felt a surge of bloodlust and instinctively bit down on the ghostly hand. A wail erupted nearby. My arms slightly relaxed, and I quickly broke free. Since the spirit whip wasn't effective, I decided not to use it. I grabbed a ghostly hand, twisting the joint and wrenching it with a loud crack. The entire sedan shook in response. Another ghostly hand struck at me. I seized it firmly, my fingernails digging into its cold skin, tearing off a chunk of flesh. Lamentations filled the air as my body was continuously assaulted by coldness, exhaling mist with each breath. However, my inner fire was also rising rapidly. The ghost sedan, under my resistance, continued to shake violently and finally crashed to the ground with a loud thud. A thunderbolt struck, and I rolled out of the sedan. Feeling a surge in my spirit whip, I swung it fiercely at the sedan door. The whip seemed to borrow the force of the lightning, leaving a trail of sparks on the door. The sedan then exploded into pieces, and the four ghostly pallbearers turned to dust. I regained my senses and walked towards Penelope Jenkins. I seemed to see a red shadow, but it quickly faded away. I sighed and approached Penelope, only to see a lump of mud on her chest rise. Then, the head of a young lynx emerged, looked at me, let out a cry, and swiftly darted into the woods. I rushed to the edge of the pit, squatting down to examine it. The spot where the lynx emerged still had a faint warmth. At that moment, I heard a very faint breathing sound. She was alive. As I unearthed Penelope, police and ambulance sirens arrived. This was 5 days after Penelope went missing, and the continuous rain had loosened the soil covering her, washing away much of it. The lynxes seemed to have stayed on Penelope, maintaining her body heat. I vaguely recalled the elderly woman telling me when I first arrived that today was the day to send the daughter back home. It was ironic how this played out. After the incident, the students who harmed Penelope were arrested. In fact, the police were already investigating her disappearance before I called 911. Ethan wasn't the mastermind, but he was still an accomplice and would face legal consequences. Penelope spent over a month in the hospital, gradually recovering. Later, her parents came to thank me, bringing Penelope along. She told me that after arriving at the abandoned village, they saw a litter of lynx cubs born in a farmhouse yard. The mother lynx had likely perished from a difficult birth, leaving the cubs crying from hunger. Derek Chun and the other students took out the cubs and played with them callously. Penelope was horrified and tried to get them to stop, but no one listened. Knowing that lynxes were protected animals, she pretended to call the police on her phone to scare them off. Instead, she enraged Derek, leading to a scuffle. Ethan wasn't entirely innocent, though he hadn't been the first to assault her either. When Penelope was pushed to the ground, she accidentally picked up Ethan's student ID, which had fallen on her, and tucked it into her sleeve. Penelope was still worried about those orphaned lynx cubs. Recalling those glowing green eyes in the woods, I reassured her, "Don't worry. Someone will take care of them." After that, I looked for Harold again, wanting to know who the expert he had hired was. I now had 3 iron boxes of the same make, which made no sense unless those involved were either part of a group or one person. Harold refused to tell me, his eyes full of hatred as he stared at me. "You're already on the list with the expert. He'll come for you sooner or later."